Once upon a time, the sun never set on the British Empire. And then, in the blink of an eye, did. How did one of history's largest empires crumble so quickly? Hold on to your tea and crumpets, folks, because we're about to dive into the dramatic, fast-paced collapse of the British Empire. At its peak, the British Empire controlled nearly a quarter of the world's land and people. From the icy shores of Canada to the tropical jungles of India, the empire ruled over more than 450 million people. But as with all empires, what goes up must come down. And boy, did the British Empire fall. Fast. The cracks in the British Empire's foundation started to show after World War I. But it was World War II that really knocked it off its pedestal. The war left Britain absolutely exhausted, financially, militarily, and psychologically. Winston Churchill, the man who led Britain through the darkest days, once said, "We shall never surrender." Well, Britain didn't surrender to the Nazis. But after the war, it couldn't hold on to its empire either. While Britain was trying to recover from the war, the rest of the world had other plans. In its colonies, nationalist movements were growing stronger. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana were no longer content with being part of the empire. British rule? Nah, we're good. In India, after decades of peaceful protests, boycotts, and a little bit of salt marching, Britain had no choice but to grant India independence in 1947. With India gone, crown jewel of the British Empire, the rest of the empire began to unravel, fast. If you had to pinpoint the moment when Britain's global power really fell off a cliff, it was the 1956 Suez Crisis. Here's the gist. Egypt, under President Nasser, decided to nationalize the Suez Canal, which was a major route for British trade, especially oil. Britain, along with France and Israel, tried to muscle their way in and take it back. Here's the kicker. The United States and the Soviet Union both told Britain to back off. Imagine that. Once the mighty ruler of the seas, Britain was now being bossed around. It was a humiliating moment, and it showed that Britain was no longer the world's top dog. The age of superpowers had arrived, and Britain wasn't one of them. After the Suez Crisis, the British government realized that holding on to its colonies wasn't worth the trouble. The Winds of Change speech by Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in 1960 was basically Britain saying, "All right, you guys want independence? Let's make it happen." One by one, colonies across Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia gained independence. Ghana in 1957, Nigeria in 1960, Jamaica in 1962, and so on. It was like a domino effect, and Britain didn't put up much of a fight. After centuries of ruling the world, the empire was crumbling, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Post-war Britain was broke. The cost of maintaining an empire, combined with the massive debt from 2 world wars, meant that Britain simply couldn't afford to be a global superpower anymore. And while Britain was dealing with food rations and rebuilding bombed-out cities, new players, namely the US and Soviet Union, took over the global stage. Economically, Britain was struggling to keep up with the booming economies of its former colonies, let alone the growing influence of the US and USSR. The British pound was no longer the currency of global trade, and its military was a shadow of its former self. But even though the empire is gone, its legacy is still very much alive. Many of the countries that were once part of the British Empire are now part of the Commonwealth, a sort of club for former colonies. English is still one of the most widely spoken languages in the world, and British culture, everything from tea, football, has left an indelible mark across the globe. Whether you view it as a force for good or a brutal colonial power, there's no denying that the British Empire shaped the modern world. But in the end, it couldn't hold on. The world changed, and Britain couldn't change with it. So, how did the British Empire crumble so quickly? It was a combination of 2 world wars, rising nationalism, economic struggles, and the emergence of new superpowers. In the end, the British Empire went from ruling the world to being a small island nation that, while still influential, was no longer the powerhouse it once was. And that, my friends, is how the British Empire crumbled in what felt like the blink of an eye. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the fall of one of history's greatest empires, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We've got more epic history lessons on the way, and trust me, you won't want to miss them.